Thanks. So we're going to look at the European Union Energy Performance of Buildings Regulations 2021, statutory instrument number 393 of 2021. So this webinar, just to give a quick overview of it, is going to look at the requirements of the European Union Regulations 2021, and in particular Articles 8.1 in part 2, 3 and 5, Articles 14.4 and 15.4 of amending Directive 2018/844 of the EPB, the European the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. So in particular, that's looking at the requirement to install self-regulating devices, the requirement for new buildings and buildings undergoing major renovation with more than 10 parking spaces to install electric vehicle recharging infrastructure, and the requirement for existing non-residential buildings with more than 20 car parking spaces to install at least one recharging point. The requirement for existing non-residential buildings to install building automation and control systems, BACs, in existing non-residential buildings with heating and air conditioning systems which have an effective rated output above a threshold of 290 kilowatts. So in looking at that, we're going to look at the three particular sections under self-regulating devices. We're going to look at that EPB requirement in particular, and then the associated technical guidance documents, L 2021 for dwellings and buildings other than dwellings. For EV recharging, we're going to again look at that EPB requirement, the two technical guidance documents, L 2021, and then also the new technical guidance document, the Energy Performance of Buildings Regulations 2021 technical guidance document. And then also for under building automation and control systems, again, looking at the EPD requirement and that new technical guidance document. So these regulations were published July 27th, 2021, with application from that date. There are some exclusions and transition arrangements which we'll go through as we go through those particular areas in the presentation. So they provide guidance, as I said, on the guidance documents provide the guidance on self-regulated devices, EV charging and BACs. In developing the guidance and the regulations, we had consultation. First of all, we had a public consultation. There was also, and with that, there was a regulatory impact assessment. And that took place between December 5th, 2019 and February 5th, 2020. We also consulted with public bodies such as Department of the Environment, Climate Communications, OPW, Department of Education, the HSE, SAI, NSAI, and the National Disability Authority. We also had stakeholder meetings with industry representatives such as the RAI, SCSC, Engineers Ireland, ACI, CIF, CIBC, IGBC, IBEC, and ESB. So firstly, we're going to look at self-regulating devices and the requirements for residential and non-residential buildings. Self-regulating devices are covered under Article 8.1 of that amending Directive 2018/844, and it states that member states shall require new buildings where technically and economically feasible to be equipped with self-regulating devices for the separate regulation of the temperature in each room, or were justified in a designated heated zone of the building unit. In existing buildings, the installation of such self-regulating devices shall be required when heat generators are replaced, where technically and economically feasible. So that has been transposed in the regulations under Regulation 5A and 5B. And Regulation 5A for new buildings states that a new building shall, where technically and economically feasible, be equipped with self-regulating devices for the separate regulation of the temperature in each room, or were justified in a designated heated zone of the building unit. And then for existing buildings where a heat generator is being replaced in an existing building, where technically and economically feasible, self-regulating devices shall be installed, shall also be installed. So definitions, definition of a self-regulating device is included under Section 1 of Technical Guidance Document. For dwellings under section 0.5 of Technical Guidance Document L. And a self-regulating device is defined as providing for the separate regulation of the temperature in each room or in a designated heated zone of the dwelling. So paragraph 1.4.1.1 outlines the provisions for new dwellings. Paragraph 2.2.1.1 outlines the provisions for existing dwellings. And paragraph 2.2.1.2 provides guidance on the technical and economic feasibility of installing self-regulation devices in existing buildings. So we're going to look at that technical guidance document in relation to existing buildings, and that is covered under paragraph 2.2.1.2. And it states then that in existing buildings, the installation of self-regulating devices shall be required that heat generators are replaced where technically and economically feasible. And the areas where it's considered technically and economically feasible to install them is when a heat generator and a heating system are being replaced, a heating system is being replaced, a heat generator is being replaced as part of a planned upgrade. Now, it's not considered technically and economically feasible to install self-regulated devices when the heat generator is being replaced in an emergency situation, so where the work is unplanned or where it's not possible to install self-regulation devices, so without carrying out substantial alterations to the system or to the building. Now, however, in those particular situations, the installation of self-regulation devices should be installed at the next planned upgrade of the building. Then for buildings other than dwellings, again, the regulation is covered under Regulation 5A and B. It states exactly the same. Again, the definitions are under 0.5. The definition of self-regulating devices is the same. And paragraph 1.4.2.2 and 1.4.4.1 outline the provisions in non-residential buildings, and paragraph 2.2.3.2 for new buildings, and 2.2.3.2 and 2.2.5.1 outline those provisions for existing non-residential buildings. So that pretty much covers self-regulation devices and the guidance that's provided in the technical guidance documents. So then we'll go on to electric vehicle recharging infrastructure. And that is covered under Articles 8.2, 8.3 and 8.5 of amending Directive, of the amending EPB Directive. And Article 2 states that with regards to new non-residential buildings and non-residential buildings undergoing major renovation with more than 10 car parking spaces, Member States should ensure the installation of at least one recharging point within the meaning of the Directive 2014/94 EU of the European Parliament of the Council, and ducting infrastructure, namely conduits for electric cables, for at least one in every 5 parking spaces to enable the installation at a later stage of recharging points for electric vehicles where the car park is located inside the building. And for major renovations, renovation measures include the car park or the electrical infrastructure of the building, or the car park is physically adjacent to the building. And for major renovations, renovation measures include the car park or the electrical infrastructure of the car park. And just the directive that's referred to, 2014/94 EU, that's the AFID, the Alternative Fuels Infrastructure Directive. So that's got requirements for EV recharging infrastructure. Then Article 8.3 looks at non-residential buildings, and it states that Member States should lay down requirements for the installation of a minimum number of recharging points for all non-residential buildings with more than 20 parking spaces by the 1st of January 2025. And then Article 8.5 is for residential buildings, and it states that with regard to new residential buildings and residential buildings undergoing major renovation with more than 10 parking spaces, Member States should ensure the installation of ducting infrastructure, namely conduits for electric cables, for every parking space to enable the installation at a later stage of recharging points for electric vehicles. And again, where the car park is located inside the building. And for major renovations, renovation measures include the car park or the electrical infrastructure of the building, or the car park is physically adjacent to the building. And for major renovations, renovation measures include the car park or the electrical infrastructure of the car park. So just in summary then, you're looking at a scope of for new buildings and buildings undergoing major renovation, non-residential buildings with more than 10 parking spaces, install at least one recharging point and ducting infrastructure for 1 and 5. For residential buildings, install ducting infrastructure for every parking space. And then for existing buildings, existing non-residential buildings with more than 20 car parking spaces, there's a requirement under the directive to install a minimum number of recharging points. And we've transposed that as 1 is the minimum number of recharging points. So now we're just going to look at dwellings, and we're going to look at the technical guidance document, TGDL 2021. Regulation 5F transposes the requirement for EV recharging infrastructure in dwellings, SI 393 of 2021. And it states that a new building containing one or more than one dwelling, which has more than 10 car parking spaces, shall have installed ducting infrastructure consisting of conduits for electric cables for each car parking space to enable the subsequent installation of recharging points for electric vehicles. So subsection 1.4.6 provides guidance for electric vehicle charging infrastructure. The provisions are outlined under paragraph 1.4.6.1, and ducting infrastructure guidance is provided under 1.4.6.2. Now, in relation to these regulations for new dwellings, there are transitional arrangements in place, and they are that regulation 5F shall not apply to a building where the submission of a notice has been made in respect of the building we're concerned on or before the 10th of March 2021, and where the submission of a notice is made on or after the 11th of March 2021, then the requirements of regulation 5F apply. And the notice that are referred to there are a commencement notice or a 7-day notice. So we're going to look at the provisions that we talked about previously there, and the guidance document. So for a new building, where there's more than 10 car parking spaces, ducting infrastructure should be provided for every parking space where the car park is located inside the building, such as a basement car park, or the car park is physically adjacent to the building, so that is like a car park within the curtilage of the site, and where a new building contains mixed uses, that is dwellings and non-dwellings, the minimum recharging infrastructure provisions for each use should be provided. For new buildings then, refer to the guidance for accessible on-site car parking, which is outlined under paragraph 1.1.5 of TGDM 2010, and the following additional space provisions should be provided where electric vehicle recharging infrastructure is installed. So for those accessible spaces, and the provision of additional 1200 mil access zone to the front of the perpendicular parking bay, which is already illustrated in diagram 8 of TGDM 2010, and then provision of an additional 1200 mil access zone to the curb side of the parallel parking bay, that's in diagram 9 of TGDM 2010. And then the guidance outlined in paragraph 1.1.5K of TGDM 2010 should also be followed for similar space provisions for the future installation of recharging points to these designated spaces. So that reference there, 1.1.5K, is in relation to ticketing machines in car parks, and there's a specific space requirement 1850 by 2100 that needs to be provided in front of those, and that same space requirement needs to be provided in front of a electric vehicle charging point. Then in terms of ducting infrastructure, that basically includes all electrical containment such as cable ducting systems, cable ladders, cable trays, cable trunking systems, conduit, etc., as outlined in the National Rules for Electrical Installations, IS 101/2020. And then where ducting infrastructure is installed, the guidance is provided in the technical guidance document. So ducting infrastructure should be adequately designed to meet the full capacity of all recharging points when installed. It should be appropriately sized for electric vehicle recharging point capacity. It should be fit for purpose, capped as appropriate, and clearly identified. It should be routed back to a suitable location with electrical supply access and adequate space provided to accommodate all recharging point ducting connections and electrical supply equipment. It should also be adequately designed for maintenance access, and it should also should be installed in accordance with, as I said, IS 101/101, the National Rules for Electrical Installations. So we'll go on then to the guidance for existing dwellings, and regulation 5F and 5G transpose that requirement. And regulation 5F states that a building containing one or more than one dwelling, which has more than 10 car parking spaces, that is subject to subparagraph G, undergoing major renovation, shall have installed ducting infrastructure consisting of conduits for electric cables for each car parking space to enable the subsequent installation of recharging points for electric vehicles. And G states that the requirements of subparagraph F shall apply to a building undergoing major renovation. In the case where the car park is located inside the building, the renovations concerned include the car park or the electrical infrastructure of the building, or in the case of the car park is physically adjacent to the building, the renovations concerned include the car park or the electrical infrastructure of the car park. So guidance then is provided under subsection 2.3.9 of Technical Guidance Document L, provisions under 2.3.9.1, and guidance on ducting infrastructure under 2.3.9.2. And that guidance is as we've looked at for new dwellings above. So the provisions then, if we just look at it in a little bit more detail in the technical guidance document. So when major renovation upgrades have been carried out to a building where there are more than 10 car parking spaces, ducting infrastructure should be provided for every car parking space. And again, where the car park is located inside the building, such as the basement car park, and the renovation measures include the car park or the electrical infrastructure of the building, or again, the car park is physically adjacent to the building, and the renovation measures include the car park, and physically adjacent again is with car park is within the curtilage of the site, and or with the electrical infrastructure of the car park as well. So again, ducting infrastructure, as I said, is included under 2.3.9.2. So then we're going to look at buildings other than dwellings and the technical guidance document L 2021 and regulation or amending or article Article 8.5 is transposed through Regulation 5E, and it states that a new building which has more than 10 car parking spaces shall have installed at least one recharging point and ducting infrastructure consisting of conduits for electric cables for at least one in every 5 car parking spaces to enable the subsequent installation of recharging points for electric vehicles. Subsection 1.4.7 provides guidance on electric vehicle recharging infrastructure for non-residential buildings. Paragraphs 1.4.7.1 and 1.4.7.2 outline the provisions. Paragraph 1.4.7.3 provides guidance on recharging points, and paragraph 1.4.7.4 provides guidance on ducting infrastructure. Again, in relation to non-residential buildings, there are some transitional arrangements and some exclusions. So the transitional arrangements then, that Regulation 5E shall not apply to a building where the submission of a notice has been made in respect of a building work concerned on or before the 10th of March 2021, or that is owned and occupied by a small or medium-sized enterprise. And then again, where the submission of a notice has been made on or after the 11th of March 2021, then the requirements of the regulation apply. So the provisions then are covered under paragraph 1.4.7.1 of technical guidance document L, and where for new buildings where there's more than 10 car parking spaces and the car park is located inside the building, such as basement car park, or the car park is physically adjacent to the building, again, where the car park is within the curtilage of the site, then the following minimum electric vehicle recharging installations should be provided. So at least one recharging point within the meaning of the AFID, AFID directive, and ducting infrastructure for at least one in every 5 car parking spaces or part thereof to enable the subsequent installation of recharging points for electric vehicles. And then at least one accessible recharging point or 5% of the total recharging point provision, whichever is the greater, in accordance with similar provision for accessible car parking spaces outlined in TGDM. And where only one recharging point is provided, this should be located so that it can be used either from a standard car parking bay or from an accessible car parking bay. And where this is not possible, then 2 recharging points must be provided. Where a new building then is located within the curtilage of a campus with multiple buildings, and the car parking is shared between buildings. Any car parking spaces associated with the new building, they must meet the minimum recharging infrastructure provisions outlined previously under 1.4.7.1. And where a new building contains mixed uses, such as dwellings and non-dwellings, the minimum recharging infrastructure provisions for each use should be provided. Then guidance in relation to recharging points is covered under paragraph 1.4.7.3. That guidance provides that all recharging points should be installed in accordance with the General Wiring Rules, NSA, or National Rules for Electrical Installations, IS 101/2020, such as guidance for isolation, earthing, etc. And where charging points are installed, they should be commissioned by competent persons so that at completion they are left in the intended working order. And then where recharging points are provided, the associated parking bay should be clearly marked and consist of the words electric vehicle charging or EV charging written on the roadway in letters at least 350 mm in height and in accordance with the visual contrast guidance provided in TGDM. And where this is an accessible parking bay, the access symbol outlined in diagrams 8 and 9 of TGDM should also be marked on the parking bay. Where accessible charging points are provided, again, section 1.1.5K of TGDM should also be followed to allow those similar space provisions in front of the recharging point itself. and where accessible recharging bays are provided, the guidance on on-site parking under, again, 1.1.5 of TGDM should be followed, and the additional space provisions, as I've already covered, of the 1200 mil to the front of the perpendicular bay and the 1200 mil to the curb side of the parallel parking bay should be provided. Consideration should also be given to the location of the recharging points and the associated recharging cables, so that they're outside of access routes and the recharging point clear space, to avoid hazards associated with tripping and obstruction of these routes and spaces. And where ducting infrastructure is provided for future installation of the recharging points, then consideration should be given to the accessible requirements needed if the charging points were installed at these locations. And again, ducting infrastructure guidance is provided under 1.4.7.4, and it's the same as I've already gone through for dwellings. So just as a couple of examples, and there's an infinite number of ways that you can actually set out these car parking spaces in terms of the space allocations for a typical recharging parking bay. But I've just given a few examples here. So I suppose the first one there, it's a perpendicular parking bay. You can see the additional 1200 mil to the top of the car parking bay, and then you'll see here to this side here, your recharging point, and then you have that 1850 by 2100 clear zone in front of the recharging point itself. So that's kind of one example how you can do it. You can combine that clear space in front of the charging point with part of the 1200 mil access route around the actual car parking space as well. Another example of that where you'd have, two bays front to front like this. Again, you can combine the extra 1200 mil in front of the car parking bay between the two spaces in that instance, and the recharging bay or the recharging point clear space could be incorporated within the level access route if there was enough space, obviously to meet that 1.1.5K requirement in TGDM. Or again, if it was a perpendicular or a parallel parking bay, again, you could combine the 1200 mil to the front again, and you could also combine that with the actual accessible zone that's required in front of the charging bay as well. So you could reduce the sort of space requirements if required. Now, there's an infinite number of ways that you could actually do this, but it was just to give an idea of, how some of these might look and still meeting the requirements under the technical guidance document. So we're going to go on then to buildings other than dwellings, the existing buildings, and Regulation 5F and G transpose the requirements of the directive. Regulation 5E states that a building which has more than 10 car parking spaces that is subject to subparagraph G undergoing major renovation shall have installed at least one recharging point and ducting infrastructure consisting of conduits for electric cables for at least one on every 5 car parking spaces to enable the subsequent installation of recharging points for electric vehicles. And then the requirements of subparagraph E shall apply to a building undergoing major renovation where, in the case of the car park is located inside the building, the renovations concerned include the car park or the electrical infrastructure of the building, or in the case of the car park is physically adjacent to the building, the renovations concerned include the car park or the electrical infrastructure of the car park. So guidance is provided on existing buildings under subsection 2.3.6, provisions outlined under paragraphs 2.3.6.1 through to 2.3.6.4. And the provisions then are as follows. So the electric vehicle recharging infrastructure should be provided when major renovation upgrades are being carried out to a building where there's more than 10 car parking spaces. And again, where the car park is located inside the building, the renovation measures include the car park or electrical infrastructure of the building, or the car park is physically adjacent to the building. And again, the renovation measures include the car park or the electrical infrastructure of the car park. And these are the minimum electric vehicle recharging infrastructure that needs to be installed, at least one recharging point, and then ducting infrastructure for at least 1 and 5. And where the recharging infrastructure is provided, then the guidance provided for new buildings under 1.4.7.3 and 1.4.7.4 should also be followed. Where an existing building again is located within the curtilage of a campus with multiple buildings, And the car parking is again shared between buildings. Any car parking spaces associated with the existing building must meet the minimum recharging infrastructure provisions outlined in 2.3.6.2. And then where an existing building contains mixed uses, dwellings and non-dwellings, that minimum recharging infrastructure provision for each use should also be provided. And where one recharging point is provided in a car park with accessible spaces, so existing accessible spaces, then this should be located so that it can be used either from a standard car parking bay or from an accessible car parking bay. And where this is not possible, then 2 recharging points must be provided. So then moving on to existing buildings and the 2025 provision under the amending directive, which transposes Article 8.3 of the directive. So that's transposed to Regulation 5D. And Regulation 5D states that in respect of an existing building other than a dwelling with more than 20 car parking spaces, there shall be installed before the 1st of January 2025, 1 or more recharging points. So Section 2 of the new Energy Performance of Buildings Regulations 2021 Technical Guidance provides that guidance for electric vehicle recharging infrastructure. Paragraph 2.1.1 outlines the provisions. Paragraph 2.1.2 outlines, provides guidance for recharging points. And again, under this regulation, there are some exclusions. So Regulation 5 should not apply to a building that is owned and occupied by a small or medium-sized enterprise. So the provisions, so for buildings where there's more than 20 car parking spaces, at least 1 recharging point should be installed where the car park is located inside the building or the car park is physically adjacent to the building. And the recharging points should be installed in accordance with the National Rules for Electrical Installations, IS 101-2020. The recharging points should be commissioned by competent persons, and the associated parking bay should be clearly marked with the words electric vehicle charging or EV charging, and also an accessible space should include that access symbol as per TGDM. So consideration also in relation to these points should be given to the locations of recharging points and the associated charging cables, again, to be outside of access routes and the recharging point clear space, and to avoid hazards associated with tripping obstruction. And then again, where only 1 recharging point is provided in a car park with accessible spaces, again, it should be located so that it can be used either from a standard car parking bay or from an accessible car parking bay. And where this is not possible, then 2 recharging points again must be provided. And again, in relation to campus buildings, where the building is located in the curtilage of a campus, the car parking space associated with the existing building must meet the minimum recharging infrastructure requirements. So that then covers all of the electric vehicle recharging infrastructure, the regulation under SI 393 of 2021, and also the 3 technical guidance documents: TGDL for dwellings, TGDL for buildings other than dwellings, and then the Energy Performance of Buildings Regulations 2021 technical guidance. So then we'll move on to building automation and control systems. So the 2 articles, which are Article 14.4 and 15.4, are the 2 articles to be transposed into Irish regulations. Article 14.4, and these are for existing non-residential buildings, and it's a 2025 provision. So by the 31st of December 2025, these requirements needs to be, the requirement to install BACs needs to be done. So Article 14.4 states that member states shall lay down the requirements to ensure that where technically and economically feasible, non-residential buildings with an effective rated output for heating systems or systems for combined space heating and ventilation of over 290 kilowatts are equipped with building automation and control systems by 2025. And then Article 15.4 states that member states should lay down requirements to ensure that where technically and economically feasible, non-residential buildings with an effective rated output for air conditioning or systems for combined air conditioning and ventilation of over 290 kilowatts are again equipped with building automation and control systems by 2025. So Articles 14.4 and 15.4 have particular requirements of those building automation and control systems, and the functionality that they need to be capable of is continuously monitoring, logging, analysing and allowing for adjusting energy use, benchmarking the building's energy efficiency, detecting losses in efficiency of technical building systems, and informing the person responsible for the facilities or technical building management about opportunities for energy efficiency improvement. and then allowing communication with connected technical building systems and other appliances inside the building, and being interoperable with technical building systems across different types of proprietary technologies, devices, and manufacturers. So there are a number of definitions included in the directive for obviously building automation control systems, the effective rated output, heating systems, and air conditioning systems. So a building automation and control system means a system comprising all products, software, and engineering services that can support energy efficient, economical, and safe operation of technical building systems through automatic controls and by facilitating the manual management of those technical building systems. The effective rated output means the maximum calorific output expressed in kilowatts, specified and guaranteed by the manufacturer as being deliverable during continuous operation while complying with the useful efficiency indicated by the manufacturer. A heating system is defined as means a combination of the components required to perform or to provide a form of indoor air treatment by which the temperature is increased. And then air conditioning system means a combination of the components required to provide a form of indoor air treatment by which temperature is controlled or can be lowered. So the articles 14.4 and 15.4 are transposed through Regulation 5C of SI 393 2021. And it states that an existing building other than a dwelling shall, before the 31st of December 2025, where technically and economically feasible, be equipped with a building automation and control system if the effective rated output for heating systems or systems for combined space heating and ventilation in the building is over 290 kilowatts, or the effective rated output for systems for air conditioning or systems for combined air conditioning and ventilation in the building is over 290 kilowatts. So Section 1 of the Energy Performance of Building Regulation 2021 Technical Guidance provides guidance for building automation and control systems in these existing buildings. Paragraph 1.1.1 outlines the provisions for heating systems, and paragraph 1.1.2 outlines provisions for air conditioning systems. Paragraphs 1.1.3 through to 1.1.5 provide guidance on the application of the 290 kilowatt threshold. And paragraph 1.1.6 provides some guidance in relation to the combined heating and ventilation systems. So what that actually means. And then paragraphs 1.1.7 through to 1.1.9 provide some guidance in relation to technical and economical feasibility for BACs in existing buildings. So if we just look at the guidance there, so for heating systems, for buildings with heating systems or systems combined, or systems for combined space heating and ventilation with effective rated output over 290 kilowatts, a building automation and control system should be installed where technically and economically feasible, and again with all of the same functionality that we've already described through the directive. So it's exactly taken from the directive there. So I won't go through it again. For air conditioning systems, again, the same for buildings with systems for air conditioning or systems for combined air conditioning and ventilation with an effective rated output of over 290 kilowatts. A building automation and control system should be installed where technically and economically feasible, again with the same functionality that we've already gone through. And then the application then of the 290 kilowatt threshold is described in 1.1.3, and this 290 kilowatt threshold applies to each system individually. So that is the obligations apply in all of the following cases. So when the effective rated output of the heating system is above 290 kilowatts, when the effective rated output of the combined heating and ventilation system is above 290 kilowatts, when the effective rated output of the air conditioning system is above 290 kilowatts, or when the effective rated output of the combined air conditioning and ventilation system is above 290 kilowatts. And then where combined systems are in place, then the effective rated output should reflect the capacity of the combination of systems. So you add together all the various systems, and if they add together and are above 290 kilowatts, then the regulation applies. Paragraph 1.1.5 states that usually a system will comprise more than one unit that operates jointly. So in this case, the effective rated output corresponds to some of the effective rated outputs. So paragraph 1.1.7 then looks at technical and economic feasibility for BACs in existing buildings. So BACs is normally considered technically and economically feasible to install for the heating, air conditioning and ventilation systems provided under the paragraph that we've just gone through, 1.1.3, is generally considered technically and economically feasible. There's additional situations where it is typically considered technically unfeasible to install building automated control system, or where a heat generator and a heating system are being replaced, where a heating system is being replaced, where a combined heating and ventilation system has been replaced, where an air conditioning system is being replaced, or a combined air conditioning and ventilation system is being replaced. And then in all of the above cases, the technical characteristics of the existing system and the building or the building unit should make it possible to install a building automation and control systems. So looking in more detail then at that technical and economic feasibility. So where it is considered that it's not economically feasible to install a BACs, then a cost-benefit assessment should be completed by an independent, competent professional, such as a chartered surveyor or a chartered engineer. And this assessment should be based on the expected energy cost savings generated by the building automation control system and a comparison of the upfront and running costs of installing the BAC system over the system's lifetime. And then obviously as CIBSE Guide H provides some information and guidance on doing those cost benefit analysis under section 8. Alternatively, you can do the simple paid back method, and that takes into account the length of time to recover the initial investment from the benefits produced by that investment from the time the BAC system is operational. And this should be completed by an independent professional, again, such as a chartered surveyor or engineer, and that will be based on the average annual energy bills over the preceding 3 years and expected energy savings of the installed building automation control system in operation. So typically, you're looking at a maximum payback of 10 years for public buildings and 3 years for other buildings such as hotels and offices that would be considered economically feasible. So those assessments then need to be retained by the building owner should they be requested by building control down the line. It may not be technically feasible to install a BAC system when the system's technical characteristics prevent the requirements from being applied, such as buildings that are equipped with old systems, so maybe historic or protected structures or protected services, but it's normally considered feasible for all of the situations outlined under paragraph 1.1.7. Just to note that an assessment methodology is being developed to determine technical and economic feasibility within the meaning of the directive. And then further information in relation to the European Union Energy Performance of Buildings Regulations will be available at future SEI events, which will take place hopefully in the first half or in the rest of this quarter of this year. So there should be, there's a provisional date of May 17th for a workshop on BACs, but that should be confirmed, I think, on the SEI website within the coming week or so. So that's it pretty much. Again, all the technical guidance documents are available on the gov.ie website at the links provided. Thank you.